Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I want to welcome you this afternoon to this, our press conference by the election observation mission sent by the OSCE Office for Democratic Institutions and Human Rights to observe the early presidential election in Kazakhstan. Here we will present the preliminary statement of findings and conclusions from that mission. And here to do that today, we have the head of the mission, Cornelia Jonker, and also on the dais with us is Megan Fitzgerald, the deputy head of our mission. My name is Thomas Reimer. I'm the spokesperson for ODIHR. We will have an opportunity after the presentation of the main findings from the statement. There will be the opportunity for questions from the media. But before that, I will hand the floor to Corinne to present the statement.
Thank you, Thomas. Good afternoon. I would like to welcome you and thank you for your coming to this afternoon's presentation of our mission's preliminary findings and conclusions. Our mission has been in Kazakhstan for almost a month now. Over that month, our core team experts have worked here in Astana, while 30 long-term observers have been deployed in pairs to all of the country's region. This has given us the opportunity to observe, study and assess the many different aspects of the campaign and the preparations that have gone into the holding of this election. Last week, the mission was joined by 275 short-term observers who were also deployed across the country. These observed election day from polling station openings through voting and on to the counting and tabulation at the end of the day, to provide in-depth information on how that voting process went. The work of these different members of the mission, taken together, allows me to present with you an assessment of the electoral process based on comprehensive, objective observation across the country, from beginning to end. Because of this, I'm confident in the findings that we are presenting here today. I should also make clear that the assessment we are providing today is of the process up to this morning, and there are still some stages to go, including the announcement of the final results and the handling of any complaints and appeals. Before I go into a more detailed presentation, our essential findings are these. The preparations for the presidential election were efficiently administered. However, necessary reforms for holding genuine democratic elections still have to materialize. The predominant position of the incumbent and the lack of genuine opposition limited voter choice. A restrictive media environment stifled public debate and freedom of expression. Election day generally proceeded in an orderly manner, but serious procedural deficiencies and irregularities were noted throughout the voting, counting and tabulation processes. ODIHR stands ready to assist Kazakhstan to remedy identified deficiencies. That's the headline, so to speak, and now I'll go into further detail. Several prominent critics of the government are either imprisoned or living in exile. The current consolidation of political power challenges the development of political pluralism, something that all OSCE participating states, including Kazakhstan have committed themselves to. Voters were not offered a genuine choice between political alternatives. The other two candidates openly praised the achievements of their opponent, the incumbent. During the campaign period, the incumbent actively toured the country in his official capacity. Together with the involvement of government officials in the campaign and the location of Nurultan offices in government buildings, this blurred the line between the state and the party. This is not in line with the OSCE commitments. We received credible reports that voters were pressured to attend rallies and to get out to vote for the incumbent. The legal framework does not provide a technical basis for the conduct of elections. However, there are undue restrictions on the right to vote and to be voted for. These, along with the undue restriction on the fundamental freedoms of assembly and expression, undermine the key OSCE commitments for democratic elections. And although the election law was recently amended, previous ODIHR recommendations remain unaddressed. These included key provisions on the composition of election commissions, candidate registration, and the complaints and appeals process. There is a continued need for further legal reform. Overall, as I already stated, the preparations were efficiently administered. All deadlines were met, and commissions at all levels were open to observers and the media. The election law does not, however, provide political parties with equitable representation in election committees. In many of the mid and lower level commissions with whom our mission met, the majority of the members and almost all of the chairpersons were affiliated with Nurultan. This raises questions about their impartiality. More than 9.5 million voters were registered to vote to this election. Prior to election day, we heard no concern about the accuracy of voters' lists from most of those with whom we have met. At the same time, there are no uniform means for collecting voters' list data. Procedures of cross-checking of the voters' list do not sufficiently safeguard against multiple voting. I have already mentioned the limitation on candidacy rights, especially the requirements in order to run, coupled with the language test for candidates, had a negative impact on the inclusiveness of the process. There were no clear criteria for evaluating the language test, so assessment was left to the discretion of the Linguistic Commission appointed by the CEC. 27 individuals were nominated, including 2 women. 3 candidates were registered, all of them men. There is a limited transparency of campaign finance, as there are no requirements for public disclosure or for pre-election reporting. Self-nominated candidates have less access to funding, so they are not able to spend as much money on their campaign as candidates nominated by political party or other public associations. The legal framework for the media is restrictive. Along with recent sanctions, including the closure of some media outlets and the blocking of some websites, has decreased the diversity of media viewpoints and stifled public debate. Comprehensive monitoring of the media coverage has been an important part of our mission's work. This revealed a lack of campaign coverage in the media, which considerably limited the opportunity for voters to make an informed choice. The three candidates' campaigns were given even coverage in the media we monitored, but the incumbent also received extensive coverage in connection with his official capacity. This advantage contributed to an uneven playing field in the media. As mentioned, election day proceeded in an orderly manner, but serious irregularities were observed throughout the voting, counting and tabulation processes, including indications of ballot box stuffing. Transparency was limited, and our observers were not always provided with the possibility of meaningful observation. This is an overview of our preliminary statement of findings and conclusions, which in itself are a dozen pages. Copies of the statements will be available at the table on your way out. This will be followed in about 8 weeks by a final report, which will also include recommendations to assist Kazakhstan in addressing some of the issues I have mentioned today. I want to emphasize that this is the purpose of our election observation activities in the first place: to assist participating states in improving their electoral processes. I know that ODIHR remains ready to cooperate with the authorities here in following up on these recommendations. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Courtney. All right, as mentioned earlier, we do have time today for questions from the media. If you do have a question, I'll ask you please just to raise your hand and we can have a microphone brought to you. I'll ask you also if you could please, before asking your question, just to give us your name and the name of the media outlet you represent.
Васильева, агентство Рейка. I can ask the question in English. When assessing the preparation for the election and the candidates who were expected to take part and those who wanted to take part but were not registered, which are the main issues that your mission saw concerning the opposition in Kazakhstan and any oppositional leaders who tried to register the candidates, if there were such cases that were monitored, and if you could tell us more about it.
Sorry, I tried to get your question clear. It's not...
Okay, yeah. Try it again. Did your mission, during the observation process of the preparation for the election, and the preparation of the candidates who maybe wanted to take part in the election but couldn't, if you could tell us, were there such cases registered by the observation mission when there were people who wanted to take part in the election but couldn't because of some reasons? Is it better now?
I think so. Maybe if my answer doesn't cover your question, then please come back to me. First, I have to say, where it comes to the candidate registration, is done before we arrived in the country. The mission arrived on the first day of the election campaign, and that was on the 26th of March. and the voter registration was already finalized at that point. What we did is talking with the candidates that registered that registered themselves and went through the process and fall out of the process in the different stages before formally being able to be nominated as a candidate. There are a few stages where they have to go through, and one of them is a language test, and there are also another few requirements. And I have to see for example, they have to live in Kazakhstan for the last 15 years. They have to be at least 40 years old, and I know also somebody fell off the total number because he wasn't 40. So there were a few restrictions, but the most important point is that the language test doesn't have clear criteria, so that it's left for the language commission to judge on their own if they think that the candidate qualified for this language test. And we think that it would be better if there were clear criteria, so that also afterwards it can be and is transparent what the reason was why this candidate didn't succeed in the language test, and that for everybody the same criteria are used. I think that's hopefully covering most of your question.
Just a small clarification. So the candidates who were not able to pass through this process to be finally registered as candidates, they mostly fell off because of the language test, or because there were some, rather than language test, or they were not 40, but we don't have to cover this one. Were there any other reasons, like they couldn't collect the number of signatures, they didn't get enough support?
There were even some candidates that choose themselves not to continue further than the language test. But after the language test, the candidates had to collect signatures. And some didn't even start this process of collecting signatures, even if they went through the language test. And there was also a candidate that wasn't able to collect the number of signatures that was requested. But you will be able to find it in our report.
Other questions?
Здравствуйте. Олег Таран, газета «Казахстанская правда». Просьба, ответьте, пожалуйста, на такой вопрос. Скажите, на ваш взгляд, то, что выборы проводились досрочно, повлияло ли в какой-то мере на техническую сторону исполнения данного мероприятия? Спасибо.
As most questions, or most answers, it has two sides. In a way, yes, the election administration was confronted with a much shorter period of time that they normally have to organize elections. But as you also will be able to read in our report, the election administrations on all different levels were able to meet with all the deadlines that they had. So, yes, formally they were able to organize the elections and to meet all the deadlines that were there for them to do the job. Maybe something that I would be able to add, something else, what is normally a part of the election, is that there are domestic observers. And maybe we can say that the early elections had an effect, a negative effect on them, being able to organize themselves and to also find funding for their observation. So maybe it had less effect on the election administration, although it had its effect on the domestic observation, and that's of course a pity.
Any further questions? Вы не можете подождите на секундочку, пожалуйста? Микрофон? Не можете?
Спасибо. Национальный канал Казахстан, Давид. Хотел бы спросить, госпожа Янтер, вы имели возможность наблюдать за выборами раньше в Казахстане. Что изменилось с тех пор и в общем впечатление от страны?
Yes, I observed the elections also in 2005, but I was here then in a different capacity. And next to that, I have to add that never ODIHR compares elections. So I'm sorry, but I will not be able to answer your question.
Независимая газета «Электро», она уже существует. С 2009 года уже вышло 106 номеров. И я хотел бы спросить, я 9 марта выпустил...
The translator is not able to understand you. I need translation.
Нам нужен микрофон, просто потому что... Пожалуйста.
Бекбулат Избраим, независимая газета «Электро», существует с 2009 года, вышло 106 номеров. 9 марта я выпустил очередной номер газеты, посвященный выборам. Я не одобряю выборы президента Назарбаева, выбрал другую кандидатуру, Полтарова Бакирова. Я хотел бы вас спросить, вчера неожиданно...
Извините, секундочку, отвечать. А вы не можете, извините, чуть-чуть потише, пожалуйста. Просто потому что слышно, трудно слышать и переводчик, и вас.
Я очень волнуюсь, поэтому я хотел бы спросить вопрос. Я сам вчера был на выборах, на наблюдателе. Ну, Томас, мы встречались, Корнелия тоже. Вы видели меня, во дворце достаточно. С 7 до 22 часов я там был. И сам я был очень удивлен, что люди 97% проголосовали за Назарбаева. Значит, у меня вопрос. Как вы это оцените психологически? Почему казахстанцы проголосовали 97% за действующего президента Казахстана, который руководит Казахстаном с 1989 года, уже 26 лет?
Извините, вопрос, пожалуйста.
Yeah. To be able to answer your question, I should try to go into the skin of the citizens of this country. They were the ones who choose the president to, and based on that, the CEC came to that turnout. So you're asking me to a question that I'm not able to answer. And of course, we mentioned that there were deficiencies and irregularities